first down. The handoff to Marlon Mack. Huge hole, 50-yard line. He's at the 40, still going near sideline. He's at the 10. He's at the 5, and he will score. Touchdown, Marlon Mack. Touchdown, INDY. And again, it's picked up. It's Darius Leonard. Leonard with his second INT, and he's streaking down the near sideline. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's going to go. A pick six for the Maniac.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast. We're talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles, and we're taking a look around the AFC South this week as an interesting opposition for the Texans, and very much been the rival in the last few years in the division, would be in the Indianapolis Colts. And taking a look at the 2020 Colts, we've got Derek and Cody from the Bring the Juice Colts podcast. How you doing, guys?
Doing well. How about you?
Yeah, all very good.
Yeah, thanks for having us on, man.
Yeah, no, appreciate the time, guys. And this, we're just saying this before we start recording. It's probably been the longest kind of off season that we've had to endure. No preseason games, and I think we're all just sort of living off training camp reports, which are all kind of very subjective and probably put in the media for a reason. I think for a lot of the time.
It really does stink because Cody and I were both originally going to try to get to training camp this year before, everything went down. And, unfortunately, with everything going on, only certain parts of the local media are actually allowed to come in and do what they want to do. So it really does stink because we were going to have the opportunity to be part of training camp, interview some people, get to do stuff like that. But, we haven't really had the chance to do that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be strange, right? Because you kind of everybody's either interviewing on Zoom, or you got to watch the game from your own home.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've had a couple interviews that we've been able to do through Zoom, which has been a blessing because last year, we didn't do anything like that. So it's really been awesome, man, to be able to do that. And most recently talked with a couple of the wide receivers, Zach Pascal and Reese Fountain. So super excited, man, for that. And what's to come, man. It's super exciting.
Yeah, I think football kind of feels like it's here. I think, like you're saying, of tiers of media members,
Yep.
and only certain media members and certain tiers can actually enter the building and get tested. And so they can actually be kind of anywhere near any of the playing staff. But it seems quite an interesting time in terms of your perception of the Colts training camp and this kind of strange off season. What's been your perceptions, and how have they seen it gone from a Colts point of view in terms of getting ready for the week one against the Jags?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it looks like overall some of these new additions are panning out pretty well so far. Obviously, Deforest Buckner, Phillip Rivers, both are looking good in camp. And then you got like Xavier Rhodes, some of the draft picks. Jonathan Taylor is a monster. Michael Pittman's had some nice moments. So overall, the team's looking good. And we've said it before on the podcast. We feel like this Colts team is probably the most well-rounded it's been in a long, long time. So super, super excited for that.
Yeah, and another great thing with what this offseason has kind of brought, Frank Reich and Chris Ballard have mentioned it several times, that this year with the way you mentioned it, how the offseason, it's different now, right? You have COVID going around. Everything is different. It's just guys having to do different things, sacrifice certain things, learn different ways. You have all these things going on. And Frank has always said, Coach Reich has always said, whoever is the most prepared through these Zoom meetings and everything else that you take in through the offseason will be the team that is going to win more games as the season goes along, because you're not going to train the same way that you did from years past. So, and he says that the Colts have been very mature, have been very good about what they've been doing in Zoom meetings. They've been very upbeat in their practices about trying to get more game ready. So that way in a couple weeks when they do take the field against the Jaguars, they're going to be more physically and mentally ready than the opposition. So I like what has been going on with the Colts so far.
I think the big question, certainly from the outside looking in right now for the Indianapolis Colts going into the 2020 season, is, what form of Phillip Rivers are you going to have, and what sort of impact is he going to have on Frank Reich? and his offensive philosophy. Do you see the identity of this team changing away from being a ground and pound, run the ball, probably the best offensive line in terms of run blocking in the league? Do you think that's going to change now with Rivers, and what's he got left?
I think that there is going to be a huge change in what we've seen. And if anyone has looked at anything that Colts media has said about what the practices have looked like for the Colts as of the last few weeks, they'll notice that Phillip Rivers has been making a ton of throws to running backs. And every single one of our running backs is catching the ball out of the backfield. That's something that we have not seen in a long, long time. Andrew Luck never got running backs that involved the way Phillip Rivers is doing it now. I think the whole philosophy of just trying to get the ball out quicker and being more diversified in the system is really showing itself through Phillip Rivers and what Frank Reich can do. I think these guys, obviously they have a connection from being in San Diego. Nick Sirianni, the offensive coordinator, as well, with Phillip Rivers and Frank Reich. So these guys all know each other. They know their tendencies, even if Phillip Rivers is about 10 years older. They still know each other very well, and they say that his drop off, he hasn't really had much. He still looks like a very capable quarterback. Frank Reich said he's very happy of what they've seen so far. Cody, do you have anything else to add on top of that one?
No, I think that they're definitely, the passing attack is going to be, it's definitely going to be a lot more prominent than it was last year. You look at the stats, the Colts were near the bottom of the league in about every passing category last year. So certainly feel like it's going to be a nice balance that they're going to be able to bring. But, talking about just the running attack, the Colts have made a concerted effort this offseason to continue to improve that running game. You think they signed fullback Roosevelt Nix, even signing tight end Trey Burton. He's more of a willing run blocker than Eric Ebron, who obviously left in free agency. And then drafting Jonathan Taylor. That just, Frank Reich and company, they said last year they want to be top 5 in the league in rushing. They were not quite there last year, and so it seems like they're continuing to double and even triple down on that this season. So I look for it to be a very, very complimentary attack both ways, from the pass and the run. That's kind of where I sit with the run, with both of it, really this offense in general. That's kind of where I sit. I think maybe not necessarily one of these will be in top 5. I think they're going to really balance each other out well. So overall, you don't know which way the team can beat you.
Yeah, because I think back to that Thursday night game, the last time the two teams met, and it felt like if don't get me wrong, Brissett had a pretty good record against the Texans for, in Indianapolis. I think he had his best ever game in I think it was week 7 last year in Indianapolis, and he certainly kind of stuck it to the Houston Texans as well when he was at New England. So it's almost in some ways kind of glad to see the back of him, because he seemed to have certain players have a certain knack against certain teams. And probably no more so than T.Y. Hilton. Where is his health at? And what do you think of the wider weapons that Phillip Rivers is going to have in the passing game with Pittman Jr., Paris Campbell, etc.? Do you expect these guys to make an impact?
Yeah, right away, I don't know about Pittman right away, because we've looked at, historically, second round receivers really don't make a huge impact. A.J. Brown last year, 1,000 yards. Normally it takes him a little bit of time to get within this offense, and just offenses in general in the NFL get acclimated to that level. But in regards to T.Y. Hilton, he seems like he's healthy. He's out there running routes. Derek and I, we've seen the Colts have posted different times where that Rivers to Hilton connection has worked really well. Hilton looks really good. Last year was really a weird year for him in terms of injuries, because before that he hadn't really missed very many games. And then last year he missed more games than he played. So, hoping that everything goes well there with the injury bug. The Colts I felt like they have just got struck with the injury bug, especially last year at the wide receiver position. They were down their top 3 receivers for a good chunk of the season last year. So I think the addition of Pittman, a healthy Paris Campbell, a Zach Pascal, who had a really good season last year. You saw that obviously in that game against the Texans. Pascal had a nice game in that first meeting. So the Colts overall, I think they have a really good barrage of wide receivers with a lot of different skill sets to kind of help Rivers out.
Yeah, and obviously everyone knows T.Y. Hilton for Houston, and everyone knows T.Y. Hilton's name. We often have a parody of reminding everyone that, NRG Stadium is like T.Y. Hilton's second home because he seems to have some of his best games in Houston when he plays there. I don't expect it to continue to be any different. Like you said, as long as he stays healthy, like Cody said, it was a very weird year. That's the first time that T.Y. Hilton's had any kind of severe injury of any sorts, especially, when he was talking about 2018, T.Y. Hilton for the last 6 weeks of the season was dealing with severe ankle pain, but was still playing through it regardless because he was trying to, make an impact on the team. So it's good to see him still playing. The connection with Phillip Rivers has been there in camp. He has caught several touchdown passes from Phillip Rivers. So I expect it to continue over, and I like what I see in this wide receiver group.
Yeah, I think Hilton's sort of grasp over the Texans, and particularly in NRG, I think was the game I was at when it was the first game after Deshaun had torn his ACL in his rookie year in 17. And I think it was quite a close game. Brissett had come in that year, and it was a strange one because the game was kind of not a lot in it. And I think he was ruled down, or he was out of bounds. I think he was ruled down, but they just got up and ran a touchdown, and it sort of broke the game open. And even in a game like that, when it was kind of a meaningless game, both teams were not having great seasons. He still managed to find a way to kind of steal the show. So it was one of those ones. And last year when you saw him kind of walk off the field and the frustration at his health, slamming his helmet on the ground, it was the first time probably in a long time that he's not been, one of the main protagonists in the games. But he's certainly a weapon, and he's still, even at this stage of his career, he's still got speed to burn and stretch the field. So that'll be interesting. Do you see the Colts running a different type of offense with Rivers, or do you think it will just be a case of that they'll call more, Sirianni will call more passing plays rather than relying on the run to move the ball?
I don't think so. I think you're actually just going to see a lot more of what you saw last year, which was talking about double tight end sets. I really think the Colts want to drive the ball down the field with the run, and they are going to absolutely hammer any defense that is not prepared to play physical all 60 minutes. If they don't, then you are going to get ran over by this team. There's a reason you bring in a tight end. You keep that offensive line in check. You're bringing in a fullback for certain situations. You drafted another running back who is one of the best running backs, if not the best running back in college football. What you want here is you want a four-headed monster in that backfield. You want them to run the ball down your throats. That's what they want to do. Now, will they get more creative with the offense in regards to passing? I absolutely think they will. Because even though Phillip Rivers isn't very athletic anymore, as if he ever was, I mean, he definitely can still mix up some throws, and he understands where to look better than Jacoby Brissett does. But I think the message of this team is still clear. Just run the ball. Just run the ball all the time. And that's what this team's going to try to do.
And who do you see being the feature back? Do you think Taylor's going to get a fair share of carries early, or will it be relying on Mack and Hines?
Yeah, I mean, Hines has never really been a carry type of guy. I think it'll be Mack early on a lot more than Taylor, because obviously Taylor doesn't have the preseason, to get more acclimated. He also had that fumbling issue at Wisconsin. I mean, I think Taylor will see the field a lot. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like as the season progresses, Taylor's going to eventually continue to get more snaps. I mean, I feel like a lot of people have just completely wrote off Marlon Mack at this point, but we saw and we heard on Monday, he was tearing up that first team defense of the Colts, which we think is going to be a pretty good unit itself. It's one of the best at stopping the run. Marlon Mack, I think he's still a top 15 running back, no doubt. Like, if he can stay healthy, which has been a big if, I really think that he has a chance to continue to get better. I really do. I mean, he had over 1,000 yards this last season, and it was really, really effective. And honestly, if he wasn't injured, if he didn't miss a couple games, he would have been, I think, 5 or 4 overall in rushing last year. So I guess in terms of your question about the passing attack, though, and just this offense in general, I think you're going to see with Rivers, you have more of the opportunity to see more of those big plays you saw in 2018. The problem was Brissett just had trouble trusting himself and making those big plays like Rivers does a lot of times, where you throw it down there at the 50-50 type of ball. Jacoby Brissett's more of a careful quarterback. He doesn't like to turn the ball over a lot, whereas Phillip Rivers is more of a gunslinger type of quarterback. So I think the offense really won't change. I just think the execution will change a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a good formula, I think, on paper, right? I think is if you can run the ball and you've got an experienced guy like Rivers in the building who can, make the checks at the line and get them into the right play and see what defenses are trying to disguise in front of it. It seems like a good formula. If there was to be anything of this offense that would concern you, I mean, partly if you think, I saw the video of Rivers walking into the building and I can't remember what date it was, in late July, and he says, "This is my first time in the facility on whatever the date was." Is there any kind of concern in this off season about having a new signal caller, and is there any kind of other weaknesses you think potentially that could cause an issue for this offense?
Yeah. I'll go, Derek. Yeah. So in terms of quarterback, the great thing, and like I give credit to Ballard and Reich for this. Rivers already knew coming in before he even stepped foot in the Colts facility. He already knew 85% of this offense. I mean, Reich even said it. Like it's pretty similar to the offense he ran when Reich was his offensive coordinator. So that's great news for the Colts overall, honestly, because obviously the lack of being together, I think they have 11 padded practices in total before they kick off down in Jacksonville. I mean, that is huge for your quarterback room and huge for your offense. In terms of weaknesses, I definitely could say, obviously Rivers, if he fizzles out, has a year like last year, but also the backup offensive line could be potentially an issue. We have all 5 starters who really didn't miss much time last year, but I would say if one guy goes down, I mean, this is really from 1 to 5, all these guys are above average type of players to elite, best at their position. So, I mean, just the trade-off from obviously offensive tackle is kind of a question mark. Some of the interior, that would be potentially a weakness for me, but really there's not a ton, honestly. What do you think, Derek?
Yeah, everyone's kind of had that same thing of, Phillip Rivers, the new guy on the block. What do you expect from him so early? It probably will take a little bit of time early on for Phillip Rivers to get fully acclimated to the system, but I don't anticipate it taking too long. I think that, like you said, he has experience with Phillip Rivers or with Frank Reich, so I don't find that as much of an issue. The inexperience, a little bit of the wide receiver group certainly does hurt a little bit. Obviously you have T.Y. Hilton as the veteran, and you have Zach Pascal, who's been in the league now for about is going into his 3rd year. So I get that aspect of it, but Michael Pittman and Paris Campbell, a couple guys that very rarely. Pittman hasn't seen the field yet, and Paris Campbell, he missed so much time last year. You would have expected he hasn't seen the field at all either. So half your wide receiver group, you really don't have any established guys out there that have any kind of experience. So it's all going to be a matter of how do they adapt to this offense. But, it could be a lot worse for them. But outside of that, I don't see too many other weaknesses in this offense.
Yeah, and I think depth probably right is, having those extra second round picks this year and picking up Pittman Jr., who's a guy I really liked coming to USC, I think, and Jonathan Taylor, I think he looks certainly an imposing kind of back, and he can run. I think the Colts, fair to say, they run predominantly power, so I think he suits that. Do you think of those two? Who do you think will have the biggest impact this year?
Oh man, that's a great question. I mean, honestly, I might go Pittman just because they're going to split carries, I think. I mean, I think overall, Jonathan Taylor's probably the most pro-ready out of any of these rookies right now, but I just think that it's going to be capped a little bit by that running back by committee like the Colts like to do. So I'm probably going to go Pittman. What are your thoughts, Derek?
I don't know. I like Pittman. I just don't know. The talk we had with Jim Aiello the other day kind of makes me question how much are they actually going to use Pittman. There's other guys out there. I'll probably still go Pittman just because I don't know. But, I mean, who knows with these guys? It's just how are you going to split the carries? How much are they going to actually use Pittman? There's just so much uncertainty that I really don't know how to give a definitive answer to that one.
Yeah, I think I think it looks like a good offense on paper, and I think the concern, from a Texans point of view, is if they can run the ball effectively, and then Rivers just gives them, that extra 5-10% in the passing game. And if you think back of all the games between these two teams in the last few years, they've all been pretty close. So and just I think if you look at the Thursday night game, I think that was just a couple of touchdowns and a couple of safety kind of mistakes that kind of let Hopkins in for a couple of touchdowns, and then there was times in the game where the Colts were driving and just couldn't quite put six on the board. So that I think that's what obviously the vision of what Philip Rivers brings. It'll be interesting to see how what he's got left, because I mean there was some games where we played the Chargers in week 3 last year, and he still looked like Philip Rivers towards the end of the year. I don't know if it's the stage of his career he's at. He just didn't look like he quite had the same juice in the arm and kind of his decision making. And I saw he talked about that recently, about having a balance between being aggressive and making kind of stupid, as he described it, stupid plays. Is that a concern, do you think, in terms of the turnovers and the sort of arm strength where he is physically at this stage?
I don't think it's too much of a concern for me. Philip Rivers is still taking this time to get used to the tendencies and how to get through to things. He's learning the fine line between being aggressive and basically being stupid. That was his actual quote. And, it's going to take time. And with Philip Rivers being a lot more aggressive in his action towards wanting to throw the ball, I think you're going to need to anticipate some more turnovers. We had that with when we're talking about Jacoby Brissett. Brissett had, not as many turnovers as other people would have liked, but he didn't have as many passing touchdowns as anyone would have liked because he was playing more conservative. That's not really Philip Rivers' style to play conservative. He's going to take some shots. He's going to take some dumb shots at times, but he's going to do what he thinks he can to help this team win. And if we're going to get a couple more touchdowns, but we have a few more turnovers in the end, I think I'm okay with it.
I was just going to say to add on to that, to what you were saying, Derek, you also got to look at the situation last year with the Chargers and all those injuries, no offensive line, really no running game. I mean, I think they went down 10 spots from where they were the year before. And Rivers, a lot of those interceptions, a lot of those dumb plays where he had to make a play or else the Chargers weren't even going to be in contention for that game. So I think that's another factor into it as well that we need to consider.
Yeah, I think that if you look at the line that the Chargers had last year, I think Feeney was probably their best guy, and there wasn't necessarily the depth there. So he's obviously got with Ryan Kelly, and obviously you've got Costanzo coming back this year. I think it's definitely going to be a step forward. I think it'll be interesting to see if the type of receivers he's got is suits his kind of throwing motion, because he's always had an interest in throwing motion and not the most sort of atypical trajectory of the ball when he releases it. So yeah, I think it's the big question, isn't it? It's probably the inflection point for this, probably for the Colts offense. I think what's interesting, if we flip on the other side of the ball, obviously didn't have a first round pick because that was traded to San Francisco for Deforest Buckner. Is he the sort of missing piece to play in the middle of that 4-man front?
Yeah, I mean, he certainly does help exactly what you need. I mean, you look at that 3 technique, which is what Deforest Buckner will play in this defense. And I mean, that 3 technique was non-existent getting after the quarterback and really doing anything of interest last year to help this team. So, you go from a guy that got, 3.5 sacks, I think was the entire 3 technique, got to the quarterback last year, to a guy like Deforest Buckner who, a couple years removed from double-digit sacks. And so he's still young. He's still very productive. He's still got to grow, which I think is huge too. But I definitely think the addition of Buckner and Reich and all those people have talked about it. With the defense the Colts run, this Tampa 2 type of defense, you have to have a really good 3 technique. You're going to live and die by this 3 technique. It's all about getting pressure from up the middle, and that's exactly what Buckner can bring to this defense, something they have lacked. Honestly, the Colts have lacked a 3 technique of this caliber for the past decade. They have not even had one. As long as I can remember, they have not had a player of this caliber.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen somebody with that kind of power and that kind of ability at the defensive tackle position for the Colts ever since I've been alive, I haven't seen one. We're always known for our defensive ends that play really well. You know, you got Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis, two of the best to ever do it, but never seen a defensive tackle like Deforest Buckner, just a guy that's 6'7", 300 pounds, can rush the quarterback and stuff the hole in the middle. I mean, he's going to apply that pressure up the middle that the Colts were drastically lacking in years past. And it's going to create much more havoc for these quarterbacks in the pocket. You know, we did pretty decent job of getting to the quarterback last year, but we did that even without pressure up the middle. So it's really nice to see what DeForest Buckner can bring and, you know, things of that nature. And that kind of leads me to a question I wanted to ask you because, you know, you being a Texans fan, you kind of have you might have an objective opinion on this question. I was told one of our FTFN guys who's a Texans fan, he's a Texans ambassador. He told me that he believes that the Texans will have a top 10 offensive line this year. Now, I called him out on this. I told him that I, in no way, shape, or form, think you guys are going to have a top 10 offensive line after last year being one of the worst offensive lines in football. I imagined it could get better, but I don't believe it's going to be that drastically much better. Do you think that this offensive line for the Texans can be better than what it was? Do you think it's top 10 worthy, or is this guy just crazy?
I suppose it depends on what you mean, you know, by top 10. The playing style and the risks that Deshaun takes will always mean that, you know, sacks, which is probably the most kind of over focused on stat in the game, is it will always be high. I think, and I think he'll take his fair share of hits because he's willing to, you know, wait for that long developing play to occur and take his shot. And top 10, I don't, definitely not in the run game. I think, you know, definitely the Colts have kind of showed them the way on that in terms of their ability to run the ball. In terms of the pass protection, I think there's a chance. Yeah, I think there's a chance. Now, that depends on a lot of things coming together. I think, firstly, the development of Titus Howard at the right tackle, who, you know, could have missed a number of games last year. And actually, when he went out of the lineup, you know, we were relying on guys off the street to come and fill that spot. And, you know, it told, and it showed in the film quite clearly. I think, you know, you've got Tunsil, who's probably, you know, on his way to being, you know, the top 2 or 3 left tackle in the game, if he's not there already. And he, you know, you've got to remember he came in in as part of that trade less than a week before, you know, week 1. So he didn't have an off season to learn the cadence, to understand, you know, the playbook, and he was just learning everything on the fly. So you're going to have, I think, an uptake in that. I think that where it really hinges on is, does Nick Martin play like an $11 million a year center? He did last year. Does he continue to do that? And then does Max Sharpen, which Brandon Thorne is probably one of the best O-line guys out there. You know, he called that one of his favorite matchups last year was Max Sharpen against Melvin Ingram in week 3 against the Chargers, and he was so surprised at the quality of play that Max Sharpen put in there. So if you put him between those two savvy veterans, Zach Fulton, I mean, he is what he is, and I think he's a solid pro. And Titus Howard, you know, if that first 5 stays healthy, there's a chance in terms of pass protection that certainly it gets recognised as being, you know, not in the, you know, the lower half of the league, which it has been for a long time. Top 10 in all categories, you know, as far as stats will go, probably not. I think maybe it'll take another year for those guys playing together because the offensive line is about continuity, and this is probably year 3, isn't it? Now that, you know, the Colts line's going into that, and you see of the same 5, so you see that progression year on year. So there's definitely an uptake in their performance, I think, and there's growth to be found. The amount of growth will depend big time on Sharping and Howard's jump from year 1 to year 2, which historically is the biggest growth you'll see in players, and particularly O-line, because sometimes actually, you know, players will take, you know, 2 to 3 years to, 3 years at a minimum sometimes, you know, in these more difficult positions to play, to find their way in the league. So I don't think he's completely off, but I think it's definitely resting on a few big points that will need to swing in favour of it.
Gotcha. Just wanted to know about that because I sat there and said he was crazy for even suggesting the idea that the Texans would be a top 10 offensive line, but it's good to hear from somebody else's point of view about that.
Yeah, not unfounded, I don't think. I don't know unfounded, but I think it'll be interesting to see the matchups against, Toure, Bangu, you got Lewis out there, and I think if Buckner can, as you said, can find pressure up the middle, and I think that's exactly why the Texans have drafted Ross Blacklock, because I think if you can have somebody who can break the pocket integrity from the inside, all those guys who have flashed. I know Torrey missed a lot of games last year, but all of a sudden those guys on the edge, their game starts to, then their production will start to grow if somebody's breaking the pocket from the inside.
Yeah, there's also another question I wanted to ask you because I'm sure that you've probably been asked this a ton, given that you're a Texans fan, and we've kind of had a lot of talks about this. So DeAndre Hopkins, he's gone. So that was kind of a weird situation. First day of free agency being open. That was a really, really, really weird day for all of us because we're trying to wrap our heads around the fact not only that DeAndre Hopkins was being traded away from the division, but also the fact that the Texans did not get a first-round draft pick for DeAndre Hopkins at all. I mean, the best they got was a second-rounder, which in and of itself is highway robbery for a guy of his caliber. What was your reaction to that trade and when it went down?
Yeah, I think initial sort of when you see the compensation, I think like compensation is the one thing that you'll always be able to criticize that move on the basis of, if it wasn't a first round pick, he should have been, multiple second and thirds at a minimum. It, we actually had a bit of a rule on the show that we're going to stop talking about it because it's been probably one that's been discussed so much this offseason, but rightly so. And I think that to answer the question is I think there was a counterintuitive situation which occurred. There's a guy who's probably not the best route runner, probably not the fastest, and is asking for $22 to $23 million a year, 2 years into a 5-year deal. All the guaranteed money, bonus signing money up front, made him the highest paid wide receiver in the league when he signed it. Is 2/5 of the way through that deal is no longer happy. So there was a situation that occurred that there was not a big trade market for a guy who teams weren't willing to pay that amount of money. Now, I know the Ravens were involved, I know the Eagles were involved, and they've all publicly been credited with pulling out of the deal and weren't willing to give up a first-round pick for a guy who they were going to have to up their contract. So it's quite difficult to lose a guy like that because his catch radius and his technique and his ability to get off press man coverage at the line was, probably what made him great. And he was a bit of a technician, but he wasn't, but his game was potentially, flawed in some ways in the sense that those skills might diminish as he gets older. So I think, and don't get me wrong, I think this comes down to relationships and it comes down to many things in terms of the, the off the field. He wasn't on the practice field much during the week at the stages of his career, and that was deemed to be holding Watson back. But you saw that in the first half of games last year. He wasn't even a top 50 receiver because he just didn't start games well because he hadn't practiced. So yeah, I mean, compensation, you can never get around the fact that there should have been more. And, if there isn't a trade market for a player who potentially will have value at some point, the best option in my view at that point is to do nothing. But they felt like they wanted to move and they wanted to move on. And very much the league, if you look at the guys the 49ers have brought in, the guys the Eagles have brought in this year, it's all been based around speed. Henry Ruggs was the first pick in the draft, elite speed coming out of Bama. And then you also had, Kansas City winning it all last year with a track team on the outside. So people are trending towards speed and want to stretch the field. And I think O'Brien's view was, there was issues with the contract, but also we've just paid tons, so we're going to have to pay Watson. That deal should be done, in the next, 10 days, I would think. It's kind of dragged on long enough now, and I assume that will get done before the end of the season. I hope it doesn't come to a sort of franchise Dak Prescott kind of situation, but it was the view, I think, of O'Brien that we wanted to have, wider and more quality depth in terms of the receiving core rather than having a predictability of 30 5%, 30% of your targets going through one player. Now, if I was to ask you a question, I was on a podcast recently, I asked the guys this: when was the last time a team won a Super Bowl having over 30% of their targets through one receiver?
That's a good point. I actually did a article back a couple months ago, actually questioning the value of a wide receiver. Because we talk so much about wide receivers, right? We talk so much about them, and we give them all the credit in the world for how offenses run. But I found that the value of a tight end is actually more valuable for a team in the long stretch of things than a wide receiver has. Just to kind of give an example as to why I believe this, kind of going a little bit into your question about, what kind of team wins the big thing with 30% of the targets for one guy. Well, here's the thing, because in the last 5 Super Bowls that you can mention, you really can't name a lot of wide receivers that are big name wide receivers that really made the biggest differences in the Super Bowl, at least the ones that won it. I mean, you could say, there was a couple guys like Julio Jones was in the one with the Atlanta Falcons, but the Falcons ended up losing. The Patriots have gone to the Super Bowl multiple times and have won. Julian Edelman was a big factor in one and was not a factor in the other. And, you could also mention the fact that, Tyreek Hill might be in there. But, you have guys like George Kittle that went, and Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz, Rob Gronkowski, other guys like that, big name tight ends that have helped their team win to go on and do great things. I mean, Trey Burton, the guy who we just signed, was the tight end that threw the Philly special in the Super Bowl a couple years ago. And now he's on our team. So, it's kind of one of those things where I find the value of a tight end being much more valuable for a team's success than a wide receiver going forward. If you just want to debate that, then just look at the teams who make it further into the playoffs. How many of them actually have a big name wide receiver? The Titans didn't. The Titans really didn't. Granted, they didn't have a great tight end either, but wide receiver wise, they didn't have any. And, it can go down the spectrum a lot. So like you said, when it comes to wide receivers, they're great in the regular season, but you have to have other things to help you move the ball down the field, because wide receivers, a lot of them get shut down in the playoffs. So you have to find other ways to win.
Yeah, and I think the big probably frustration with Hopkins was he was getting pushed inside to play in the slot because he wasn't consistently getting separation on the perimeter, and he wasn't open, and he wasn't a top 10, not even 15 receiver in terms of separation if you look at some of these more advanced stat metrics. So I think you're right, Derek. I think in terms of, if you look at a guy like George Kittle who's just been signed, or Travis Kelce, probably Kelce's not as much of a blocker, but somebody like Kittle who can be a big part of your running game, but then also break one up the seam for 20-30 yards is really valuable when you're trying to be balanced and you're trying to disguise what you're going to do. I think the part of it was predictable as well. I think we iced the game against Kansas City to win up there with Hopkins in the slot catching one over in a quick slant, sort of a quick dump off pass into Hopkins to win the game. Then the Texans ran the same play but from the opposite side against the Colts the week after, and obviously Eberflus had watched the film and they snuffed it out and the ball got turned over in downs. And it seemed kind of predictable at times and it seemed easier to defend. So I think there's an element of unpredictability that they want to put into into Watson's game rather, that wasn't there when, that he was relied upon as a number one target and a safety blanket for him. And I think, you can do that with a tight end. But I think, when you're playing against, different types of coverages, and it's not about a physical matchup, it's more about getting separation in scheme, then actually, the view was taken that we would, move on from that contract because we couldn't pay him. And if you think of, a question for you guys, where do you think wide receiver sits, in the priority of positions that you're going to pay on your roster? And I think with the amount of guys that are coming out now, every year is this best draft for wide receiver since we can remember. Every year it's saying that now, and I think, because you think from the high school to college game, people are playing 3, 4, and 5 wide all the time. So the number of snaps these guys are taking, is just creating that talent pool, is becoming bigger and bigger. So I don't think, for me anyway, that wide receivers in the top, even 6 or 7 positions in terms of importance of building a roster when you've got depth. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, like you said, like for whatever reason, it seems like these last couple of years you've been like, oh, this is the best wide receiver class. No, this is the best wide receiver class, and you can find value guys anywhere. I mean, I feel like a lot of people rag on like running backs, for example. I feel like receiver is sort of starting to be viewed, maybe not fully like running back, but a little bit more like you can find a guy a little bit later on in the draft. You don't have to draft a wide receiver in the top 10 or whatever. You can find value guys. Heck, the Titans got A.J. Brown in the second round, and he was the best rookie receiver out of anybody last year.
Beg to differ on
you can
that.
find
Beg to differ on
really
that.
anywhere.
Terry McLaurin was the best.
He was a top.
Terry McLaurin was the best. I'm just saying.
Well, he was a second round pick.
Yeah, Terry McLaurin was he second round? Yeah, he was. No, he was second round. He was late second round.
So.
Yeah, late second round.
You could, I think that's right. I think teams are waking up to the fact that you can find value in guys. And we picked up Isaiah Coulter late in the draft this year from Rhode Island. And the reports from the training camp that he's comfortably making the roster this year, and he's actually missed time with a neck injury. Yeah, and Isaiah Coulter is a late pick for the Texans this year, and it looks like he's going to make the roster comfortably a bit ahead of guys that have been there for years. So there's definitely depth to be found at that position. Mm-hmm. So I think people like to criticize that move, and I can see from the outside looking in, but I think you've got to bear in mind that the game's changing and the level of players that are coming through the college ranks. I don't know what the draft's going to be like in 2021. Right enough, it could be a real lottery. I think you could probably get a first or second round type player in the fourth or fifth round if people aren't going to have that final college year of film. But so I think the draft this upcoming year, it's going to be about probably volume rather than value in terms of picks. So, and you've seen teams get move picks out, like Jamal Adams and things like that. So they're kind of almost very cautious of this year's draft. But yeah, I mean, so getting back to the defense, in terms of that, do you think Eberflus is sort of cover two, where they run a lot of stunts up front? Will they be able to get enough pressure to probably make up for this? Probably not. Rock Ya-Sin, guy at Temple, got in the second round the year before, probably going to be your number one corner.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a battle between him and Xavier Rhodes for that number one corner, but also a guy that is not really talked about in the national media, Kenny Moore. They send him on a lot of blitzes. I mean, you saw in that Kansas City game, playoff game, and then also, I think you guys even saw it, Kenny Moore came off the edge in that playoff game, and then he also did the same thing in Kansas City, and then when the Colts were victorious down in Kansas City last year, Kenny Moore had a really nice blitz. So the beauty with Eberflus is he changes things up, like you said. He has multiple guys coming all over, which I think is great. And I think the cool thing is the Colts have figured out ways to get pressure on the quarterback, even with a lack of pass rush, if you will. Like even in 2018, I mean, they didn't have Justin Houston. They really didn't have a great defensive line, honestly. But they figured out ways and conjured up ways to get to the quarterback. And now with the addition of some of this more talented guys and some younger guys have developed a little bit more, I think the pressure is going to be there a lot more than they've seen. I really do. I think the combination of talent and just what Eberflus can do, and the fact that now he has a couple years of tape on some of these guys, on some of these other teams, I mean, he's done a great job of adapting to some of these offenses. So I really am excited for this Colts defense. I think they have a lot of potential for sure.
And do you think potentially, I mean, I think you're right in terms of Kenny Moore. I think he's probably the top 2 or 3 nickel corner in the league. I think he does it. I think you're right. He's just probably not talked about enough. And I know he kind of signed a sort of kind of small to medium sized contract when he got up there, but he's definitely a guy that's definitely not recognised in the circles that he probably should be. A guy who probably came in with a huge amount of or a big a big first round pick and a big name out of college in Malik Cooper. They didn't take the fifth round option, considering that. Plus, Desir is no longer on this team, who, in my view, from outside looking in, was probably number one corner. Is that the turnover and change of personnel in the secondary a concern?
It obviously is a little bit, because Desir was really good a couple years ago. I mean, you saw he he really had a great couple games against Hopkins when they played. But he dealt with injuries and he was getting up there in age, and so I think the Colts' point of view with basically trading Xavier Rhodes for Pierre Desir is the fact that Xavier Rhodes a couple years ago, he was an All-Pro corner. Now, obviously, we don't know if he's going to get back to that or even get close to that. But I think the Colts were willing to take the risk of more of a higher ceiling potentially, but also the risk of potentially a lower floor as well. So overall, it is a concern. I think overall for me, the cornerbacks are kind of a concern for me. Really, the secondary is just young and unproven outside of like Xavier Rhodes. So, I mean, it is a little bit of a concern for me, but overall, the Colts really believe in Xavier Rhodes a lot. They really think that he can offer a lot to, obviously on the field, but also in mentorship to some of these younger corners the Colts have. They really feel really good about it so far. So, it's early into training camp, but it'll be interesting to see what happens with that other guy trying to replace Pierre Desir this year.
And in terms of, I think one thing I've always found quite interesting about the Colts defense is that, probably linebacker, with Darius Leonard and Walker's quite a strength. But often, they seem to, have roll out dime packages out there. And I don't know who the dime linebacker will be. Is it Tavon Wilson or Odom or who that might be this year? But do you think, can you see Eberflus sticking to those sort of, quite heavy dime looks, 6, 5 or even a nickel with the 5 DBs? Do you think that's going to be something that they'll stick with? Because I think from a Texans point of view, you think the way we'll get after the Colts and the 2 games that we've got in the schedule will be throughout a passing attack and in big plays and shifting momentum. Do you think he'll continue with those sort of looks and taking those sort of linebackers off the field, or how do you see him kind of working it this year with the turnover in the secondary?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that he'll adapt for sure, whatever the passing situations are. But I think, yeah, for overall, though, the Colts have 2 really good linebackers in terms of coverage. Obviously, you said Darius Leonard, and then they have Bobby Okereke, who was a 3rd-round pick this last year out of Stanford. He's very, very good as well against the pass. He's kind of in that Darius Leonard mold a little bit in terms of very physically gifted, very quick type of player, athletic as can be. So, I mean, overall, I think, yes, the Colts will in certain situations use more of a dime look. I definitely think so. But also, yeah, I think that you shouldn't count out them. I mean, they basically created a position for Bobby Okereke to get on the field last year because they felt like he was so good. Overall, I think, yeah, I think the Colts will adapt, but you're right. I mean, there is a concern, obviously, with the lack of knowns at this point with this corner room. I'm really unsure at this point for this group, honestly.
Yeah, and I think when you look at your guys' schedule, I think it certainly feels like any sort of off-season kind of hindrance with a lack of time with the coaches and staff. You think it feels like, certainly on paper, as you said, you got the Jags week 1 in Minnesota, you got the Jets, Chicago, Browns, and Cincinnati before the bye. That kind of feels like you've the scheduling gods have done you a solid there in terms of that opening to the schedule.
Yeah, that schedule it's pretty nice, and for whatever reason, if the Colts can start out in Jacksonville with a win, man, I'll consider that. I don't care what the score is. I don't care how bad Jacksonville is. We cannot beat them in Jacksonville. So I'm really hoping, man, that we this year just smoke them in Jacksonville just to help us out, please. I mean, the last couple of years have been completely ugly in Jacksonville. I mean, I don't think the Colts have won in 4 or 5 years down there in Jacksonville. I don't know what it is.
I think it's been longer than that, hasn't it?
Was it 2014 or 2016 the last time they won?
I think it was 2014 the last time.
Wow. So it's been 6 years. Wow.
Yeah, and he's right. I mean, the sad part is, no matter how trash they might be, because we know they're tanking, it doesn't matter. We cannot just bow down to these guys. We have to play 100% the best football we got, because we never win in Jacksonville. I don't understand why. I don't get it, but we never win there. I just simply don't get it. And it angers me, and that's why I'm a little hesitant to say we win this game, because it's just bad luck.
I think you see teams just seem to have some kind of stretch, that places that they don't win. I think the Texans had that in Lucas Oil for the longest time. So yeah, I think it does happen. I think the Jags will be a bit of a different proposition this year than they have been. I think they've kind of got away from some of the identity they've got. But if you think of that opening, realistically, you think 4 to 5 wins, even pre-Rivers and pre, of potential offensive improvement, would have been possible anyway. All guys being healthy. And then in terms of how the schedule opens up at the back end, obviously you've got Detroit, Baltimore, Tennessee, Green Bay, Tennessee, Houston, trip to Vegas, then the Texans again before you finish up with Pittsburgh and then Jacksonville. It was bookend in your schedule. You've not got many games in the division, obviously pre-bye. In terms of that post-bye run, going to Baltimore, Tennessee, Green Bay, and then Houston. Do you think that's the stretch that's potentially going to define the Colts season?
Yeah, it definitely will because, you got that good stretch of games where it's a lot of your divisional games. And, unfortunately, towards the end of the year, that's where a lot of the games will be. So I don't even mind if the Colts struggle early. It's all about finishing the season strong, kind of like what we did in 2018, where, we won 9 of the last 10. If we can do that, then, we'll be put into a very good situation for when the playoffs come around. And then we'll obviously lead the division when it comes to record wise. But yeah, it is very critical because, division games mattered a lot this year. And it's going to be very pivotal that we have our best football at that time of the year.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially with the AFC seeding, how that's going to play out, and also just kind of a measuring stick to how some of these stack up against some of these teams. I think that's going to be big, especially if you're in playoff contention and maybe you don't beat Baltimore, but maybe you're down to the wire with them. Then you're like, we have a chance. We feel like we can compete with the best in the AFC. I think that's a good barometer for where you're going to be at as well.
Yeah, obviously, the Texans and India's going to play 2 and 3 weeks. I think that's probably depending on how the two teams get or what the record's shaping up like before they get into that 3-game stretch. The Texans actually go out east to Chicago and come back that week in between. In terms of those 2 games, I think that's going to be something that probably both teams will be want to have their best football in front of them at that point. But it certainly looks like that. Basically, if you look at the Texans opening games, when we start with Kansas City, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, it's not the easiest stretch by any means. So certainly in terms of how the schedule is shaping up, I certainly think that gives the advantage to the Colts, particularly allowing them to maybe stack up some wins early and then take that momentum. Then talking about momentum in terms of that 2018 season, when it all kind of came together for the Colts in a way that hadn't done, right at the start of the season. What do you think drove that? Because momentum's such a big thing in terms of getting hot at the end of the season, and that's what every team aspires to do. What do you think was the key things that drove that? And then what do you think? Do you think that relates to this 2020 team as well?
Not really. I mean, it really is the same that, the momentum's going to be something that's very pivotal. This year might be a little different with the fact that, there's not going to be many fans in the stands this year for a lot of it. Momentum's going to be different and how you approach that, how you're going to get out of slumps and everything. But yeah, momentum this year more important than any other time with, having that home environment different than it has been in a long, long time.
And considering that weird year, all things being equal, what are your expectations for this Colts team? What do you think? Where's the ceiling and where's the floor?
Alrighty. I was thinking there. So I always said 11-5 was kind of where I thought they were going to be. I definitely think the ceiling could be 12 or 13, maybe. That could be the ceiling. And I probably think the floor is probably 8 or 9 wins, honestly. The floor, the absolute worst they could go because you improve a lot of areas. You were 7-9 last year. There was a lot of close competitive games that you lost, but there were also some competitive games that you won. So overall, I think, yeah, that's kind of where I stand. Derek, do you kind of agree or where are you at on that?
Yeah, I agree with the floor and the ceiling. I've said 10-6 this whole time. So yeah, I would agree. Eight wins is the floor. And 12 wins would definitely be my high when it comes to the amount of wins that they could achieve this season.
It feels like the AFC South has got a chance to have at least multiple teams in the playoffs, considering that you've got that extra spot this year.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You got that extra spot. A lot of things can go weird for a lot of teams, and you're right. I mean, it feels like a three-headed monster right now when it comes to the AFC South. I mean, the Colts, the Titans, and the Texans all have legitimate chances to make the playoffs. And it's funny we're just leaving Jacksonville out of there, but of course they did that to themselves. So it's right. I think that the AFC South could legitimately have three teams that could, potentially make the playoffs. So hopefully that's what happens because I'd like to actually see that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I don't know what your perception of the Titans are. I think it seemed like they got good matchups, and and it hadn't been for some shaky field goal kicking, they might have, had a better record than they did last year early. But it felt like they got some good matchups. So I think definitely, the division is wide open, but it's all to play for as we get into 2020, which could be a really kind of strange year like no other. And I think health is going to be a factor beyond what it's ever played into the variables before, and it's going to be an interesting watch, see how this AFC pans out, and it's going to all kind of really work itself out with those late games that are all kind of stacked up in the schedule that they often seem to do now.
Yeah, I mean the Titans certainly have a good collection of matchups that they have favorable. Obviously, their running back Derek Henry, a very good running back, has really found his groove over the last year. No question about that. And Ryan Tannehill kind of solidifies the position. They have a decent amount of wide receivers, even though I feel like AJ Brown's just mainly the one and only guy. Their linebacker group, really good. They got a solid defensive line. Their secondary still pretty solid, even though it's not over the top. So yeah, they got a solid defense and a solid offense. It's again another team that can make some noise if you let them, and they're well coached by Mike Vrabel. So I'm impressed to see where the Titans have gone so far.
Yeah, I was going to add they're really well coached. Mike Vrabel's one of the best coaches in the league. I definitely agree with you, Derek. Yeah, the Titans are definitely, I feel like, potentially they have to be, right, the favorites right now for the AFC South. They went the furthest, but yeah, they're just really overall a solid team from 1 to 53. I mean, they've got a really solid, offensive line, defensive line, linebackers, decent secondary. We know Ryan Tannehill. We know Derrick Henry, obviously. So overall, I feel like there's not like a huge weak spot for them. Like they're just a really overall solid team.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's probably the closest the division's been in the last number of years, where you've got three teams, and divisional games are often tight. There isn't, they're often split, and I think what will come down to perhaps will be the reasonably equal divisional record between those three teams. But it'll be interesting to see how they get in the other divisional games to kind of shape their schedule. So I think it's the salt to play for, and it's probably the least predictable it's been in a number of years. And I think it's certainly been they're all there to play for. We're just over 1 year after the fact, and have you guys got? And it was a Houston guy. Always had a lot of time from, the true sportsman in every sense. It was always picked up in his clips. But Andrew Luck retiring, is there any kind of thoughts on that one? Just over a year on there.
I try not to think about it. It hurts my heart. Anyone that knows that anyone wants to go back a year from now and look at my Twitter feed, just look at it. There's some feed on there that I think my haters would probably really like about me, but my emotions were so bad that day. It killed me, a part of me inside.
Man, I know. Oh, it just hurts to say it. It hurts to even think about it. It's just, man, this is a wild, wild thing that happened. Something you'd never expect. Like I've seen so many people say that's the craziest thing I've ever seen in sports. Like, and people who've been working in the industry for years and years. I still refuse to believe that he's retired. Like, it's just that shocking. Like, just no indication at all, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 2 weeks before before the season starts, he's just done. I mean, I can't even comprehend that. It's crazy.
Yeah, I always go back to 2016. I saw him in NRG, and I just thought that night he didn't look right, and you could tell he was playing through things. And then 2018, he looked like back to his best. So I think that was probably where the shock came in, because it looked like he'd overcome the injuries rather than be continually hindered by them. But a great guy and a great professional, and I don't think we'll probably see many more guys coming out of college like that as a pure pocket passer and a kind of polished pro,
Yeah,
from day
he
one.
was a generational player, man. That's why it was so tough.
Yeah. Ugh. He definitely was, man. Like, I think for me, it's just like we don't appreciate him enough until he's gone. Like, I think that's just how it was. Like, we loved Andrew Luck, but like, if you would have told me 2018 that Kansas City game would have been the last game I ever watched of Andrew Luck throwing, like, actually playing in a game, man, I would have relished every moment of it. Like, that's just hindsight's 2020, but wow, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think it's something that's probably altered the dynamic of the division, and it's probably altered the franchise in many ways. And do you see Rivers carrying on after this year? I know he's sort of taken on a high school position as the head coach in a year's time. Do you think he'll be there for 2021?
I mean, I think that's the hope that he continued to play 2 years. I think that's what Rivers has said. Like, he wants to play 2 more years. And so I think it all depends really on how does he perform this year, right? Does he have a year like he had last year, or does he have a 2018 type of year? If he has a 2018 type of year, then, I think the Colts will re-sign him. Uh, so, yeah, I mean, for me, it really is depending on how he plays. I think he feels like he can play a couple more years. It's to be determined right now if that's with the Colts or not.
Yep, I'm in the same boat with that one.
Yeah, excellent. No, okay. Well, thanks very much for your time, guys. It's been great to talk some Indianapolis Colts and get up to speed of where they are in this kind of strange off season. The two teams will meet, as we said, twice in 3 weeks, in week 13 and 15. So we'll look forward to those games, and I think, as we said, it'll shape the schedule. So just want to say a thanks to Derek and Cody from the Bring the Juice Colts podcast. You can follow them on Twitter at BJTPod. And if you want to catch up with what's going on behind enemy lines, I suggest you go and check those guys out. Guys, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having us on, man. Always great to talk football.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate the time.